The .NET framework was released in 2002, an eternity ago in the technology world. Since then, developers have used .NET to build and run all kinds of Windows applications. Over the years, Microsoft has added amazing new features to it, so much so that every new release has an overwhelming number of things to learn and explore. During this long evolution, .NET has provided good backward compatibility, meaning that Microsoft has worked hard to not break our applications built with older versions of the framework. But that dedication to backward compatibility, as well as a rush to add new features, has built up some significant technical debt in a framework that grows ever larger with each new release. And the IT industry is undergoing constant change and competition, so eventually every technology product has to have a major innovation shift, breaking with the past in order to fully modernize the technology. For .NET, that day has come. On one hand, the traditional .NET framework, the Moment 4.x, is a very mature and rich framework, great for enterprise application development, and it will continue to be with us for a very long time to come. On the other hand, it has several limitations that can't be changed without breaking with the past, and the first and probably the biggest one is that it's Windows only. So it's very much focused, Windows-specific features are baked deep into the framework. Another problem is that it's a large and monolithic framework that has to be installed in full on each machine where .NET code is going to run. It also has a slower release cycle due to its large surface with a monolithic nature. It also has a large memory and drive footprint, which limits the efficiency of hardware and of the resources that it needs to use. Scalability could cost less with a modular framework with a pay-for-play approach, like in .NET Core, where most applications that utilize only parts of the core will have a smaller deployment footprint. And there's also no side-by-side deployment at the application level, causing some high friction and impact to production servers when new versions of the framework are released. And then on the, third hand, .NET Core is a much leaner and modular framework with much better resource usage efficiency. Another fundamental goal in .NET Core is to have the .NET everywhere, as Microsoft puts it, by providing cross-platform support. As a result, the .NET Core platform is the foundation for the future of .NET. I have to admit I was a bit leery when Microsoft started talking about rebooting .NET and ASP.NET. It's been a long journey with a lot of false starts and a lot of angst along the way, for both Microsoft and those of us following its development. But with the RTM release, we finally saw the work pay off in a flexible framework that finally seems to have a unified vision on what it is and where it's going. The unified command line tooling, the ability to run cross-platform, and relative ease with which you can now put applications together is good insight into what we can look forward to now and with the new features and functionality promised in the future. Now only time will tell if Microsoft and other implementers can pull it all off. Can they deliver runtimes that work satisfactorily on every targeted platform? And that's a really big question. If they do, it's going to revolutionize application development across platforms, which is an unfulfilled dream going back to the earliest days of popular computing. And with the initial release of .NET and ASP.NET Core, things really are looking up. That initial release was a big first step, but there's a lot left to do. Fortunately, Microsoft has a coherent, consistent vision of where it's headed. So what does that mean where we are? Well, and the big question, of course, is should you jump in today or wait? Well, maybe or maybe not. And that, of course, is the variation of the standard consultant's answer of it depends. All right, so here I'm going to focus on ASP.NET Core, since that's the first real application library released for what's going to be the .NET standard framework. First thing to note is that Microsoft restarted the version number at 1.0 for a reason, and you can make jokes about how Microsoft products aren't any good until version 3 and all that, but this really is a break with the past. They've learned from the past, there's a lot that's familiar to it, a lot of things work the same way, but there's a lot of things that are quite different. So it's not exactly a complete version 1.0 of the product, but it's really pretty close. One thing you need to do is keep a close watch on the .NET Core roadmap that you'll find on GitHub, because that has a lot of information about where Microsoft is, what the next steps are, what the next features that they're going to be adding are, and then basically what they're looking for longer term. And that's going to be a big help in helping you decide if you should jump in, because maybe there's one thing that's missing, but it's the top of the list on the roadmap. Well, then, there's still a little bit of risk, but it might be worthwhile jumping in and going ahead. And maybe even downloading the pre-release version from GitHub and working with it and giving feedback to Microsoft. So there's lots of opportunities like that. But the thing to keep in mind is that right now, ASP.NET Core is nowhere near as functional as its full framework cousin. Classic ASP.NET is a mature development platform that runs on Windows and supports most of the common needs of web applications today. But it's an aging framework in serious need of overhaul, but it does get the job done. And Microsoft isn't abandoning it. Even though most of the attention is on Core, classic ASP.NET is going to continue to get development love for a very long time. Okay, now there are a few specific issues that you need to consider. ASP.NET Core is going to grow in features over time, but you need to deal with a few things. One issue that you'll need to deal with is that today there's kind of limited support from third parties for ASP.NET Core. That began to change very quickly after the initial release. But you can't count on your familiar tools to be there right away. You want to check before you commit to .NET Core development that any and all tools and other libraries and whatever else you need for your application to be successful are available and work with .NET Core. And then tooling's another issue. If you're happy with the command line tools in .NET Core, particularly if you're running on other platforms, rock on. But everything is not finished for Visual Studio, and Microsoft is virtually guaranteed that it's going to change. But there will come a time when that will settle down. And the tooling really isn't too bad. And then yet another issue is whether you really need to develop applications across the platforms where .NET Core runs. If you do, including to look forward to mobile platforms through Xamarin, then you'll want to jump into Core wholeheartedly. If not, if you're happy and content with Windows, then stick for now with the full framework in classic ASP.NET. It'll serve you well for years to come. But if you really need to modularize your applications, packaging up only the framework features needed without lots of bloat, then dip your toes into Core. When all the features are there that you need, then you can start building on Core. One other possibility to consider is using ASP.NET Core on top of the full .NET framework. Now, this is something that isn't real obvious from most of the documentation, but ASP.NET Core can also use the full .NET framework instead of .NET Core. In fact, as I showed you, this is exactly what one of the ASP.NET Core project templates in Visual Studio does. But really, that seems to make limited sense. If you want to use ASP.NET Core, you likely want it for, one, its reduced footprint, or two, its ability to run cross-platform, or maybe both. If you use it with the full .NET framework, you're giving up those features and using what today is not quite a full-featured web stack. On the other hand, you do benefit from the new support for dependency injection, which I really only mentioned in passing here, and application configuration. This kind of integration just doesn't seem to have much of an upside, particularly next year and the next couple years when the full vision of ASP.NET Core becomes reality. On the other hand, you would be able to take advantage of the new ASP.NET Core features, such as tag helpers and various other new features. But you're paying a pretty big price for those features, so it's really only you can determine if that is worthwhile enough to you. So it all really comes down to whether you want to fully commit to these new technologies or remain mired in the past while embracing the new. Okay? And that sounds a little bit negative, and there are some situations where you may want to do it, but proceed carefully. Okay, so the bottom line is that for most developers, I think you probably shouldn't jump wholeheartedly into ASP.NET Core yet. It's a beautiful platform that just isn't ready yet, but Microsoft is working hard to flesh it all out. If you foresee a need for any of the very significant benefits, particularly running cross-platform, and its modularity for a reduced footprint, start testing the waters with smaller standalone projects that don't have heavy integrations with other systems. Find out for yourself the challenges, then study the roadmap to see if Core is heading in a direction that will work for you in the longer term. But if everything that you need is there, then go for it wholeheartedly. And then in the longer term, I think we'll all be embracing ASP.NET Core completely. It'll be so much better a development environment for today's web and better able to adapt to new online technologies and applications.